Hare Krishna. So it's our great fortune to have the association of His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj. Vivo! So Maharaj has been so kind and merciful to come all the way here to give us his association, to give us the nectar showers. We are discussing the nectar of instruction by Rupa Goswami. Maharaj has been explaining that last time. Maharaj started the second verse and he was talking that how the verse number 1 and 2 are very much related because they both are talking about the sense control. And there Maharaj very beautifully explained that how if there is too much desire for material sense gratification, then that is totally opposite to the desire for Krishna. So we can only do one of the two. We can either give ourselves to Krishna or we can do something for ourselves. So both are opposite. And Maharaj explained the whole verse in connection with the how it's all lack of sense control which leads to all those 6 things which are unfavorable for devotional service. And Maharaj was saying that the example from the analogy from the Bhagavatam, that just like if you have to go towards the east direction, so if one wants to go to the east direction, then one cannot go towards the western direction. But if one is going to west, then one cannot go to the east. Similarly, if one wants to please Krishna, then one doesn't want to please one's own mind and senses. But if one is trying to do something for pleasing one's own mind and senses, then it's opposite to trying to please Krishna. So Maharaj very beautifully explained last time the second verse. Today Maharaj will start the third verse of Nectar of Instruction. Come, let's welcome His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj by 3 times loudly chanting Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shinravani Paschatya Dishatarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shvasadi Gaur Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. So the first 2 verses were negative in the sense they pointed out the different obstacles, 6 obstacles to bhakti in terms of lack of control of the senses and the results of that, how these things will disturb or counter the development of bhakti. So here we got some favorable items, 6 favorable items: utsahan, nishchaya, dharya, tat karma pravartanat, sangachaga, sato vrite shadbir, bhakti prasidyati. So that means enthusiasm. Utsaha is enthusiasm, and nishchaya is conviction, and dharya is gravity, seriousness. Tat karma pravartanat refers to following rules, which previously you may have rejected because of too much sense gratification. Sangachaga, of course, is to give up the bad association. And satovrate, follow good association and proper conduct. So, if we control or we do the opposite of the negative things previously discussed, we end up with these favorable items. In other words, we have these groups of 6, and we can relate them to some degree. Of course, it's a little bit general. We had manasavega, and so then we had that related to prayasa, over-endeavoring, and we can counter that with conviction in bhakti. We endeavor for bhakti instead with great endeavor. So we have to have great conviction for that. And we had anger, or krodha vega, which is also coming from the mind. Rejection of rules. We get frustrated and we don't follow the rules. So then we follow the rules. Tat karma pravartanat. We had jiva vega, the tongue, which was distinct from vacha vega. So one is taste and one is speech. So the if we have unsteadiness, then of course, and all the senses will get uncontrolled if we have the 2 groups of senses, the knowledge senses and the action senses. So the tongue is for taste is a knowledge sense, and if our knowledge senses are not controlled, we end up with unsteadiness. But we should follow the previous conduct properly of acharyas, etc., and we can counter that in that way. Vachovegam is lack of control of the speaking, and it ends up in prajalpa. We'll speak all the material topics instead. And this is countered by gravity. Sometimes we talk about mona, silence, but we are not really silent in the sense that some yogis are silent and they don't speak at all. Rather, we control our talking, and instead we engage our speaking propensity in glorifying the Lord instead of doing negative things. So we're grave in the sense that we don't talk on non-spiritual things, and we talk on spiritual things. And Udara Vega was the urge of the belly, which leads to overeating. And then we have the opposite. Of course, the belly represents all of these other senses, etc., bodily senses. And we counter that with enthusiasm for the angas of bhakti instead, including, instead of overeating, we eat Krishna Prasad. And the genital was upasta, and then that was a bad association. We associate with women outside of marriage, then it leads to lots of negative things. And we counter that by the Sangacharya. We give up that type of association. So there's some sort of correlation between the 6 items of the first 3. So, enthusiasm means a positive attitude towards bhakti, and with a great hope that one will progress in bhakti and attain the results. And this consequently means that if we have faith in the process of bhakti, we do not have faith in other processes like karma or jnana or yoga. And so we give up other processes in favor of performing bhakti. And of course, this will counteract all the other desires for sense gratification, etc. Nishchaya means, we know the word nishchaya means certainty. So we practice with great faith and conviction that bhakti is the only path. This, of course, is related to enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is more, we can say, the positive attitude we have. But it is very much related to conviction. If we don't have conviction, we cannot have good enthusiasm. So if we're convinced of the process and we're convinced of the goal, then we can be enthusiastic. So the two are intimately related. We see in the Nectar devotion that Rupa Goswami, when he talks about the in Vaidhi Bhakti, he talks about the devotee's faith. So he classifies it into 3 types: Uttama, Madhyama, and Kanishta. So the Uttama in Bhakti has Nishchaya, very firm faith and firm convictions. And of course he has skill in the scriptures and in logical use of them. So in other words, that conviction, determination to do things properly is essential for the development of bhakti. We know that faith is the qualification for bhakti. And Jiva Goswami makes the point that faith is distinct from bhakti if it's the qualification, because the qualification cannot be the same as what it's qualified for. So if you're qualified for entering into university, that's different from the actual study in university. It's the qualification for it, so it's a little bit different. So in the sense of faith is the qualification, that is different, distinct from the process of following bhakti, that is hearing, chanting, remembering, etc. So that sort of distinction is made, and the faith is defined as a conviction in the process of pure bhakti and its result, prema. And if we analyze very carefully we have to understand that this conviction does not come from the mind, because mind is only, we can say, a material device, which is always changeable. So when we analyze where does the faith come from, then we have to understand ultimately it's the jiva. So when the jiva develops a certain conviction, called faith in the process of bhakti, that becomes the qualification for performing bhakti. If it's only in the mind, then it'll be a temporary phenomenon, which somebody could also change by counter arguments or whatever. So when the soul itself has, through its experiences and through agata sukritis, has developed that faith, then that becomes the qualification for performing bhakti. If we don't have that faith, how can we do the process? So that becomes the qualification. That doesn't mean when we do bhakti, the qualification disappears. It actually becomes stronger. So therefore, if you're an uttama bhakta in terms of faith, then your conviction is very strong. And if you are kanishta, then we have komala sraddha, very weak faith. So the faith is there, but in the beginning we can say it's weak, but then by the process of bhakti it becomes stronger and stronger. So it never leaves the devotee in spite of the fact that it's the qualification for bhakti, and we don't classify it as bhakti as such. So, of course, it is also included in things like surrender, etc. That type of attitude of having great faith and hope, etc., is included within the process of surrender. So we in that surrender we have the 6 items, and among the items we have this. We rely completely on the Lord as our protector, etc. So that depends ultimately on great faith. So if we have this great faith in bhakti, this will counteract the other prayasa, the endeavor for material gains and enjoyment in the material world. So faith, very, very important. Oh, by the way, all these items, if we look at them, they are more or less attitudes we have to have. Whereas when you talk about the angas of bhakti, they're more or less activities, because they, by and large, of course, we have surrender and things like that. It includes attitude, but most of them are activities, engagement of the senses. So we have engage the mind with meditation, engage the voice with kirtan, etc. So here we have more attitudes. So that's why they're not included within bhakti itself as angas, but they're necessary elements which are favorable for bhakti. So these are mentioned here. So dharya, that actually comes from dhira. So a dhira we usually think of as a person who was very serious and calm. So we can say he's very grave. So he's always fixed in his process of bhakti and is not diverted by other things. Of course, the dhira is also used in relation to other persons like jnanis or yogis, etc. But here we're relating it to the devotee, so we have a little bit of a different meaning. He's not a person who's simply detached from everything, but rather he's serious about the process of bhakti. So if we have that seriousness about our practice, then this is favorable for rejecting all the other activities of the senses, that is, desire for sense gratification, either the knowledge gathering senses or the karmendriyas. So prajalpa was one of these activities of the senses, knowledge gathering senses, when it's uncontrolled. So we do the opposite if we have seriousness about the process of bhakti. Karma pravartanat. So, karma here refers to actions of bhakti. We follow the activities prescribed in bhakti, the activities which are prescribed in the scriptures. So this, of course, includes all of the angas of bhakti that we have. The angas are classified into two groups: the positive ones and the negative ones. In the among the 64. So among the first 20, which are the door to bhakti, then we have 10 which are positive and 10 which are negative. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. And so those are the nishat. So we often have negative and positive instructions given to us. So the positive ones are called the vidhi, and the negative ones are called the nishad. So we follow both those things, the positive things and the avoiding other things. So all these are included in the angas of bhakti, while remaining indifferent to the practices of jnana and karma, etc. We can't be attached to those processes. In the definition of bhakti, jnana karma dhyanavritam, there it says that it should not be obstructed by jnana, karma, etc. Which does not say you immediately reject all jnana, karma, etc., but rather these processes should not obstruct it, the process of bhakti, which means they should not contradict it in any way. So in other words, it's explained that if the karmas are done without desire for material benefits, and without the idea that if I don't do it I'm sinful, etc., then they can be done. There's no problem in doing them. And the same with the angas of jnana. The problem, of course, comes that when we do these karmas or we do the practices of jnana along with that, then we may carry on desire for material benefits and desire for liberation, because they're closely associated previously with those particular desires. So it may be difficult for us to dissociate ourselves from those desires, and then it will contradict ani abhilasha shunya, the devoid of other desires. So then that becomes the dangerous aspect of engaging in them. But if we engage in them without that, the idea of getting material desires, without the idea of being sinful if we don't do the activities, and we do them out of duty alone, then there's no problem. Then it's anavritam. It is not. They're not obstructions to the process of bhakti. So in this way, we follow the activities, the proper activities of bhakti, both positive and negative. And of course, this is the main aspect of bhakti, the angas of bhakti, and then related to that, then we have these attitudes such as utsaha, nishtaya, daryat. So we do them in the proper way, and if we do that, then we'll avoid obstacles. It will be ani abhilasha shunya as a result. So previously had niyamagraha, to reject the rules completely. So this is the opposite. We engage in the rules positively. Sangatyaga. So we have rejection of sangha. Obviously it means the bad sangha, because we have sadhu sangha, that's very good. But rejection of the other sangha. So the previous verse mentioned about the other type of sangha, which was unfavorable. So then this refers to rejecting that. So that unfavorable sangha was associated with women illicitly, associated with a person controlled by women, associated with associated with women who are associated illicitly, and associated with non-devotees, mayavadis, atheists, pretenders, and other persons. So a lot of it has to do with the association with women and people connected with women. So then the opposite of that is to give up that bad association, either the women or the people who are closely associated with women. So that is, we can say, a negative injunction, a nishad. Don't associate with the asat people. Of course, then we have the positive aspect of that sadhu sangha. We should associate with the devotees. So that's the positive aspect of this one, sangha tyaga, to avoid the bad association and associate with the devotees. In the Harinam Chintamani, their Bhaktivinoda, after going through the 10 aparadhs, then he says the way in which we can counteract the aparadhs is to do the opposite. So instead of sadhu ninda, criticizing the Vaishnava, we glorify the Vaishnavas. Instead of thinking that bhakti is a karma type of material activity, we understand that it is beyond the material world, beyond the three gunas, and it gives us prem, so it's quite different from material activities. So by doing the opposite activities, we can counteract the negative aspects of aparadhs and whatever. So similarly here, bad association, we counteract that with good association, which is a very positive element for developing all the favorable qualities. Sadvriti. This can have several interpretations. Vritti, in one sense, means maintaining one's body, somehow or other, maintenance of the body. This, of course, is mentioned in the first angas of bhakti also, that one should maintain one's body as necessary without taking too much, without taking too little. So then we also try to do this according to the rules of varnashram, to minimize sinful activity. So in that sense, when we're supporting our body, we become obligated to follow the rules of varnashram to some degree. So we don't reject all the rules of the varnashram. And of course, according to ashram, then we have different rules on how to support the body and whatever. So for the brahmachari, his support of the body is he goes out and begs food. For the grihasti, he has to work, and through that he gets his maintenance. For the vanaprastha, he depends on donations from other persons. For sannyasi, he doesn't care. He just, whatever comes. So in this way, for the different ashrams, then we have different ways of supporting the material body. With the proper attitude that the devotee is not interested in material good food or whatever like that. He's more interested in the simply it's the maintenance of the material body. So this, of course, also happens a great boon for controlling the senses in all ways. Because we are living in the material world with a material body, we are obligated to support that body somehow or other. So the question comes how to do it if one is a devotee. So the preferable method is to follow the rules of varnashram to do that. So we have the varnas, and then we have the various duties and activities and vidhi and nishad within each varna and within each ashram. So accordingly we support our material body by that method. So therefore the varnashram system becomes useful. At the same time, we know that bhakti should not be contradicted by the rules of varnashram. So some of the rules of varnashram are not exactly favorable for bhakti, so therefore those rules we avoid or modify. And particularly the varnashram itself is dedicated to material advancement. We do dharma to get artha and kama, and while minimizing sinful activity and increasing our punya. So it aims at enjoying in a sattvic way in the material world. So that is not the goal of the devotee. So that we have to reject. So that is why it says you do the activities of karma, but without attachment to the results, without desiring material enjoyment. And any aspects which are unfavorable we reject, such as worship of devatas, etc. So therefore the rules become modified. And when they become modified, then we call that Daiva Varnashram, or spiritual Varnashram. So in the Chaitanya Shikshamrita, there, Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls these rules the Gona Vidhi of Bhakti. So Gona here means secondary. Of course, Gona also comes from Guna, and Guna means material gunas. But we can't say that Bhakti is in the material gunas. But it's utilizing the Varnashram rules. So the Varnashram comes out of the gunas. It's concerned with people in Tamagun, Rajagun, Sattvagun, and various rules they follow to progress upwards in the gunas. So these rules are not the same as the rules of Bhakti. The rules of Bhakti are the engagement of the senses, the 64 angas of Bhakti. The rules of Varnashram, though they may include worship of the Lord, etc., and kirtan, they are secondary, and they're often guided towards punya, to raise yourself in the material world. So their function is quite different. So, though the elements are there in the Varnashram system, we have to modify them to make them favorable to bhakti. So therefore, avoid the worship of David as avoid the material aspects of them. So what, in that process, the question would arise, why do them at all then? And because they may be favorable for maintaining your material body. Somehow we have to work, somehow we have to interrelate with other people in the material world, so we use the rules of Varnashram for that purpose. And then we do that in a favorable way to bhakti. So that is the basic principle of accepting those rules. At the same time, in the Bhagavatam it says one is not obligated to do these rules, and to think that if one doesn't do them, one is sinful is not part of bhakti. Rather that if one happens to not do some rules, doesn't really matter in the eyes of the Lord, as long as one is doing bhakti. Hari Bhakti Vilas also says that if one fails to do some of one's karmas in the material world, then the devatas do all the karmas for you. They make up and they compensate for you like that. So, and then there's no sin for that. So therefore, the obligations that are implicit in karma yoga, you have to do this. If you don't do this, it's sinful. Do not apply to bhakti. When one does bhakti, then if one dedicates oneself to the Lord, one is free of all sin. So anyway, one has to follow some sort of system for maintaining the material body, and then we adopt the rules of Varnashram, so broadly divided into those for the body. So we have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to do so many things. So how do we do that? So we follow the rules of Varnashram. One should work. Everybody has to work. So then Varnashram system must work according to Varnas. So you engage according to your propensity for work. And that should be sinless. Don't do sinful activities in the occupation, etc. So there are rules for each particular Varna. And along with that, apart from the work aspect, then we have things like eating, sleeping, and bathing, and whatever to maintain the material body. So we take the rules from Varnashram for that as well. So how to bathe and how to keep clean, etc. All these are rules of Varnashram which we incorporate into our process. And then we have social rules. So of course within bhakti then we just have the devotional rules. We teach those who are less, we associate with those who are equal, and we serve those who are superior. That's our rule of association. But then how do we deal with the rest of the people in the world? People who are not devotees, people who are members of your family, people who are you work with, etc. So then we have again the rules of Varnashram for that. Of course we give respect to all living entities. But then we have obligations within family, etc., and all that, and obligations to neighbors and obligations to society. So one can participate into those things also, to some degree, without attachment and only as a matter of duty, etc. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur even says, so when we become devotees, then not associating with non-devotees means that we don't associate them for spiritual matters. But as far as material matters, yes, we can associate with them if it means it's a matter of work or whatever. And if they're suffering in the material world, you can also help them in some way. You don't just say, okay, they're non-devotees, so we don't care about anybody. So as far as material interaction, we can help people who are suffering and whatever like that. And there's no harm in doing so. So we carry over into bhakti some of the elements of the varnashram, and along with that we have rules for family, and then we have the samskars, etc., taken from the varnashram system, so we apply the samskars like marriage, etc., and in this way one can raise family. So, but then again we see that when in the samskars, etc., then there are material elements. So then we have to modify those elements. We omit the worship of pitras and devatas, and we worship the Supreme Lord and the devotees instead. And so this way it becomes favorable for bhakti. So we alter different things in terms of rules for the physical body, social interaction, raising family, etc., so they become favorable for bhakti. So in this way, we can maintain our devotional practice with a minimum of disturbance. But we should realize that the two things are quite different. Those rules from karma yoga, even though they become devotionalized, they're quite distinct from the actual rules of bhakti, which are directly and by their very intent, they are devotional. In other words, kirtan is meant to glorify the Lord. That's all it's for. It's not to get your material benefits or everything else. But we modify something from karma yoga so that it becomes favorable for bhakti, and we introduce the Supreme Lord. Originally it wasn't like that, so then it's a modification of something else. So it's a little different. Nevertheless, it's not unfavorable for bhakti. So why do we do them at all? It's because we do have to support our material body in relation to that and live in society, so we follow those rules to some extent. Okay, that's that verse.
Hare Krishna. So Maharaj, like the question will come, there are several questions as you very beautifully explained. So the question will come that who has to modify these rules? Who has to implement these rules?
Yeah, so we depend mostly on our acharyas for that. So we find that, for instance, Gopal Bhatta revised the samskars and omitted all the devatas and put names of Vishnu there instead. So that's one example of what one can do. The other acharyas and other sampradayas are a little more conservative, so the Madhvas and the Ramanujas basically don't modify anything, but then they modify their conception of it. So if they're worshipping devatas, they understand they're servants of the Supreme Lord. So they worship Shiva, but then they say Shiva is a devotee of the Lord, etc. like that.
Like in the present context, because now practically we do not have a society which has rules at all.
Yeah.
So for devotees especially, if we have devotee society, devotee community, devotees, so they have families, they have to work, what all you said, eating, sleeping, bathing, different rules are required for that. So we need a quite clear guidelines on those rules, etc. Because it seems that there is no framework existing. So then if we take it from scripture directly varnashram, that doesn't work. It has to be modified. So who has to modify, who has to place that properly?
Well, ideally the acharyas would do that, but of course in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, they were operating within the varnashram system, so there was not such a problem So then individually probably they would just do those which are favorable, and they don't discuss it too much, otherwise. And of course it's also individual, because according to advancement then the rules would change, what you're going to do and what you're not going to do and like that. So then it's a little bit you can't put absolute rules on everybody, because the one who's in bhava and prema obviously is not going to follow the same rules that everybody else follows. So in that sense there was no real standard for everybody set up by the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Now we do find in other sampradayas like the Sri and Madhva Sampradaya, they quite strictly follow the varnashramic rules. They're very, very strict in following those. At the same time, with the idea that they're not attached to the karma aspect of them at all.
Although though we find that actually Mahaprabhu rejects that whole thing of Madhva discussion and Ramanuja discussion in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He says that the goal they take it as Varnashram, and the goal they take it as Supreme Lord's worship with those rules.
Yeah.
So Mahaprabhu totally rejects that. He said that's not what actually we Gaudiya Vaishnavas will do. So definitely we cannot take it from there also. So our question comes is that it's quite likely, if we do not have a framework for devotees in the modern age, we are postmodern, because modern could be Bhaktivinoda Thakur's time, etc., where those rules were actually at least existing in some way. So it's like postmodern era. We have no rules, no regulations, nothing. The whole society is like a sinful society. So if we don't have that framework existing, then it's quite likely that either devotees will be confused, or they will go towards sense gratification only, which is what the whole world is actually doing. So that's like some sort of either sahajiism, where we are actually some sort of devotional service we do, but then it's all mixed up with so much sense gratification, or it would be just some confusion. We don't have any clarity over there. So is it not that present GBC members and acharyas like you have to also set up such things?
Well, we take the example of people not born in India at all, then they do bhakti. So there is nothing of varnashram at all. So then what do? Somehow they survive, somehow they advance, whatever. So whether there is or isn't a system, if one is sincere in bhakti, then one can survive and one can progress. So that's the ultimate solution to the problem. Whether there is or isn't a varnashram system, you can still succeed at bhakti. And we find that persons like Haridas Thakur were examples of people who weren't in the varnashram system at all. They weren't raised in it, and they couldn't follow it because they were excluded, and they weren't allowed to follow it even. And they attained the highest level, etc. So therefore that shows that bhakti is independent of the whole system. But if it's preferable, if for normal people, that they would follow, and they were following that system up until maybe 100 years ago, to some degree. But that time also was probably quite irregular, but even up to 100 years ago. But now, since that time, very irregular. So if one is in India, then there are remnants of that system, and one can follow to the best of one's ability. But then again, we would rely mainly on the bhakti process.
So one thing is to frame the rules. So you said acharyas, but then who would implement it? In case if we at all get the framework, then how to implement? Who would implement it? Because in tradition times it was the Brahmanas who actually framed the rules, and then the Kshatriyas who actually executed those rules.
Yeah.
So
well, that's why it is very difficult to implement a system at all of varnashram for devotees as such. Well, it's difficult even for karmis to implement a system nowadays. Who's going to do it, and who's going to enforce it, and who's going to follow it? It's very questionable. Government cannot do it. Same within a devotional society. Who's going to implement it? Because whoever does it, somebody's going to object. So it's very, very difficult to do such a thing. And then again, we get a lot of problems, because then we have to start defining people in terms of gunas, and we don't want to do that. So it becomes a little difficult, because the devotees beyond the gunas, so put them in the gunas is an offense, etc. So, and then people, if they're stuck in a guna, then they'll object and say, that's not my guna, like that. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that some authority should decide when you're growing up what your guna is, and then according to that work. But then I don't know if any system was worked out like that, obviously. So mainly they went by birth. That's why the whole society went by birth, because there was no person there to judge the gunas of a person and put him in a proper varna afterwards. So they just went by birth. That was a simpler process for them.
the implementation difficulty as well as...
Of course, the implementer of the system is Manu and his descendants, but then Manu's descendant isn't there either. He's disappeared, and he won't appear until Satyuga. Then he comes back, and then he starts implementing. So that this indicates that it's very difficult to implement that system as it was. All we can do is take elements of it which are favorable for bhakti and try to implement those things.
But even for that, someone has to implement it. Even for taking the elements favorable, someone has to implement them.
Yeah. Of course, what are the favorable elements? Even to decide what are the favorable elements, even that is a... But we have some basic things, like in Hari Bhakti Vilasa, because basic rules of cleanliness are taken from the Varnashram system, etc. So some of those things are there. Non-controversial things, of course. Yeah.
So then, since we depend largely on the attitudes of bhakti then, not exactly on Varnashram, although you said that in long run it is a boon for controlling the senses, but we don't so much depend on that.
Yeah.
So then we will largely depend on the attitudes in bhakti.
Well, I think instead of concentrating on the exact rules of Varnashram, we concentrate on the principle of somehow controlling the senses as much as possible. It's just a matter of how much. So Varnashram is that one very strict standard. Western world has a very broad standard, so it's like a little bit different. So, and then of course that strict Varnashram standard may be too strict, and then we cannot follow it properly. So that you cannot marry outside your Varna, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. So many rules are there like that. So they may be a little bit too strict. So then we have to modify those also.
So since we will largely depend on the attitudes in bhakti, so would you like to explain, Maharaj, that how a devotee would, like you said, dhairyat. So dhairyat is related to enthusiasm, because a devotee who is serious will enthusiastically practice. So can you explain that how the dhairya, this attitude, a devotee will develop? The devotee remains serious about one's practice of Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, so ultimately here we just have a list of qualities or attitudes, and Rupa Goswami doesn't mention how to cultivate them, but he says they're just favorable for bhakti. If one practices bhakti, one develops all good qualities. That's the second quality of bhakti, subhada. So one develops all good qualities. So even if one starts out as a Sudra or a Mlecha or whatever with no good qualities, if he has faith in bhakti and practices, he should develop qualities like this, which are favorable for bhakti itself. In the process, of course, because he comes from a background which he's got all the bad qualities, then he may have the unfavorable qualities also mixed in with it. But by the practice of bhakti and through his faith, then he should develop in this direction. So the main import is, of course, is that he always has to endeavor to control the senses. Control of the senses, of course, we can say is not an anga of bhakti itself. The engaging in the practice of bhakti, that's our control of the senses. So if we sincerely engage in the processes of bhakti, then automatically the vegas should get controlled, and consequently these other things should decrease. So if we see a prominence of the vegas and consequently all the bad qualities manifesting, then we can understand that the process of bhakti is not working properly. Or, of course, if the person was at the very beginning stage of bhakti, and therefore he has a lot of anarthas, etc., but then he should progress, and those things should disappear with the development of bhakti itself. So in other words, by the process of bhakti, all the favorable elements should manifest nicely, and all the bad things should disappear. Because the more we do bhakti, the more we control the senses, and the less the negative desires will manifest.
Sometimes devotees ask this question, since we have to work in material circles and there are people who are not devotees, so the qualities like truthfulness, honesty, or this kind of things, so how much a devotee can practice? Because like you said that actually at least for the work, honestly, you said that it should be according to Varna, it should not be sinful, it should be honest, like that. So sometimes devotees get this question that from my side, if I put just honesty in the work or in the study field, then the others actually exploit. Because you have to have certain amount of dishonesty to be able to deal with the dishonest people also.
Yeah.
So then how much...
Well, I think Prabhupada also mentions that, that we have these principles, but then again, the Vaishya, sometimes he has to exaggerate the quality of his product to sell it, like that, whatever. So it's just the nature of the particular varna and the occupation, etc. On the other hand, we don't do this to excess. So within some limits it may be there, but we don't do to excess and deliberately to cheat people of, in very devious ways.
So that means that a devotee should not be...
In other words, there's nothing perfect within the material conduct. There's always going to be some, defect in everything we do. So we can't have a perfect system, but we try to minimize it, that's all.
So that means we have to look at that time what is more favorable for our Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
So like sometimes because...
so obviously if we're not too attached to material advancement, then we will minimize all these things. I mean, it's necessary we do, but we minimize it.
Yes. So, similarly, the obligations part, as you were saying, can you explain, Maharaj, that at what stage of devotional service a devotee is at a stage where the obligations of various things which are there in the varnashram, etc., they are not so much strictly put on the devotee? Is it that some
Well,
stage?
it is said that one who practices bhakti is not obligated to the forefathers, to the devatas, so there's no rina at all, actually. And in Bhagavad Gita, if you practice bhakti and surrender to me, then don't have any fear of any sin by not doing those activities. So in one sense, immediately one has a strong conviction in bhakti as the highest process, then obligation is finished. If one goes to the higher qualification, one is not qualified for the lower activities. So that's the general concept.
Can we say, is it only at the level of just beginning of faith, Shraddha itself, or is it at a particular stage like Nishtha? Or
well, we can say when the faith is strong enough, that's all, when it is a strong faith.
Strong faith means it won't get disturbed by the arguments of people or situations, etc. That okay. Yes. Maharaj, can you explain also how a devotee can remain enthusiastic in one's practice?
Well, of course, all of these qualities, the boon for all of these qualities to develop is also good association. So we associate with the devotees who have these qualities, then we naturally will tend to pick up the same qualities. So good association is very, very necessary for encouraging bhakti and all these qualities to develop. That's one of the main ways of getting your enthusiasm, whatever. The other, of course, is through scriptural understanding. We understand what the goal is. So then the conviction in the goal will lead us to enthusiasm to get the goal.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Yeah, please.
Maharaj, regarding Atyahar, we find in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he used to feed his devotees till the neck. How do we understand it in the context of Atyahar?
So that, of course, is a traditional, we can say, a custom that for the guest, that you have to fully satisfy him so that he should be full. But of course, we may say that's an exaggeration in one sense, that up to the neck or whatever like that, until he's fully satisfied, we can say. And of course, if one is more advanced, then one is satisfied with much less. So it depends on the person. So in that sense, but nevertheless, the obligation to satisfy the guest should be there, and of course, because it's prasadam, then it's spiritual as well. Lord Chaitanya also ate a lot, and then he got criticized by Ramchandra Puri, whatever he said, the ants on the floor, etc., like that. You're eating sweets, etc., like that. So then he was an aparadi because of that. So Lord Chaitanya showed that if we eat prasadam, then there's no problem for so we can't accuse the person of sense gratification. But at the same time, we do have to avoid overeating, etc., because it's detrimental for our health and for mentality and for advancement.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Questions? Raise your hand. So you said that for developing enthusiasm, one should have a good association of those devotees who have those good qualities, as well as conviction in the goal. So when the conviction by the reading of scriptures, etc. So is there a particular requirement of one's own self-impetus also within it? Because one may have good association, one may also be studying scripture. Is it not that one has to have some voluntary self-motivation also in this?
Well, we can say that's related to understanding the goal. So just like if you're studying and you have to get your degree, so then if you're not enthusiastic to get it, then you're probably not going to get it, isn't it? So somehow you have to have enthusiasm for that particular goal. So then there's different ways you can get that enthusiasm. Of course, other is by associating with students who are also trying to get there enthusiastically. So you develop enthusiasm. The other is by your internal understanding of what I'm going to get out of that goal. So then you can control your senses and study and do whatever to get to the goal. So that's why I said the understanding of the goal. That's the internal aspect. So if we have great conviction in that and are inspired by that, and then we develop enthusiasm.
And this happens? This happens, the clarity of the goal, how does that come? How does the clarity of the goal, that this is the goal, prema?
Well, of course, when we understand scripture very well, and of course, with the development of bhakti itself, then our understanding of the goal becomes more deeper, we can say, as well. So we can say that also that the utsaha in the beginning may be artificial, and it becomes this utsahamai type of thing of the one of the negative qualities of the neophyte. But then the more we realize, then the more that enthusiasm becomes genuine enthusiasm.
Because Srila Prabhupada says that if you don't feel enthusiastic, you should act enthusiastically. That's why I was asking this question.
Yeah. Well, that's one idea, that obviously by going through the motions of a certain attitude, then we can also encourage it. But of course, it has to have some foundation as well. So the foundation is there. We have the proper understanding. And of course, the other thing is taste or ruchi. If we get some positive experience, this will make us enthusiastic to go further. So if we're at the lowest level, then we can aspire for the next level, and our taste will increase, and we'll inspire to go to the next level, etc.
Anyone else? Any Matajis have any question? Raise your hand if you have anyone. Okay. So let's thank His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj for giving such wonderful explanation of the 6 items favorable for devotion service by 3 times loudly chanting Haribo! 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 So devotees can come and collect prasadam from Maharaj. Maharaj, you can accept.